The cabin door creaked open against the howl of the desert wind. Nate Callahan's hand froze on the grip of his Colt 45, finger tight, breath held, ready to kill or be killed. Every outlaw knows the sound of death when it comes for him, and for a heartbeat the silence stretched thin as a trigger wire. But the silhouette that slipped through the storm wasn't a bounty hunter. It was her. Isabella Vasquez stepped into the flickering glow of his oil lamp, her riding cloak damp with rain, her dark hair clinging to her cheeks. For a moment the storm outside seemed to fade, and all Nate could hear was the pounding of his own pulse. 6 months. 6 long months since that dusty road near Santa Fe where 3 drifters had tried to strip away her dignity, and he had stopped them. 6 months since he had given her a false name, Tom Rivers, before disappearing into the wasteland of his sins. 6 months of running from the past that hunted him like a starving wolf. Now here she was, in the one place she had no right to be. The sheriff's daughter, the one woman in Lincoln County who could destroy him with a single word.
"Don't move," Nate growled, though his voice betrayed the tremor of recognition. "If your father sent you, I came on my own." Her eyes, deep and unflinching, met his across the narrow room. The lamplight caught the curve of her cheek, the quick rise and fall of her chest. She looked nothing like the innocent girl he remembered. She looked like a woman who had made up her mind. "You shouldn't be here," he said, lowering his Colt, but not his guard. "You don't know what you're walking into." "I know exactly what I'm walking into." Her words cut through the storm like a blade. She stepped forward, boots brushing the wooden floorboards, and for a moment her shadow merged with his against the wall. "I know who you really are, Nathaniel Callahan." The name hit him like a shot to the ribs. His chest tightened. No one in Lincoln County was supposed to know that name. "And I know," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "that my father means to hang you at sunrise." Nate's breath left him slow, heavy. Sheriff Miguel Vasquez, of course. He had expected the rope eventually, but not this. Not her standing here with his death sentence burning on her lips. He searched her face for betrayal, for the trap that surely had to be coming, but what he found instead was something far more dangerous: longing. Outside, thunder rolled low across the desert sky. The storm had come to Lincoln County, and it had just stepped inside his cabin. Nate set the Colt back on the table, though his hand lingered there, never straying far from the grip. "Then why are you here, Bella?" The old name, Isabella, caught in his throat like dust, so he softened it. "If you came to deliver the news, you could have sent a deputy." She stepped closer, the storm's howl following her like a jealous shadow through the open door. Her cloak slipped from her shoulders, revealing the outline of her figure in the lamplight, curves that spoke of womanhood, not the frightened girl he had once pulled from the dirt. "Because deputies carry guns," she said, her voice steady though her breath came fast, "and because they don't listen. But you," she hesitated, her gaze holding his with a heat that unsettled him, "you once saved my life when you didn't have to." I figured that meant something. The memory returned sharp as a knife. 3 drifters cornering her wagon, hands already reaching where they had no right. Nate had drawn down, fired 2 warning shots into the dust at their boots, close enough to send them running without bloodshed. When he'd helped her to her feet, her dress had been torn, her shoulder bare. He'd turned away too quickly, ashamed of the way his eyes lingered. And when she looked up at him then, with fear, gratitude, and something else, he had felt it. That pull, the kind a man spends the rest of his life running from. "You bandaged my wounds with hands that shouldn't have known gentleness," Bella whispered now, her eyes never leaving his. "Since that day, I've wondered who you really were.
I looked for you everywhere, Nate. I asked every ranch hand, every drifter, if they'd seen a man named Tom Rivers." Nate's jaw tightened. "Tom Rivers doesn't exist." "I know." She took another step closer. Rainwater glistened on her blouse, the fabric clinging to her with each rise and fall of breath. "But Nathaniel Callahan does. The man who rode with John Tunstall. The man who watched his boss die in the Lincoln County War.
The man who killed Bob Ollinger. Nate felt the weight of the name like a noose tightening. Bob Ollinger. A deputy, yes, but also a brute who had been ready to shoot down a Mexican boy barely 16. Nate had given him a chance no one else would, and still the law called it murder. "You don't understand," Nate muttered, retreating a step toward the wall. "Your father's right about one thing. I'm dangerous to be around." Bella's lips curved, not in amusement, but in something closer to defiance. "Dangerous?" she repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "Is that why my heart hasn't stopped racing since the day you saved me?" Lightning split the sky outside, white light pouring through the cracks of the cabin. For an instant, she looked otherworldly, half angel, half temptation. And in that moment, Nate Callahan knew the storm he feared most wasn't the one raging across the desert. It was standing in front of him, asking him to let it in. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The desert road stretched wide and empty beneath the burning New Mexico sun. Dust curled off wagon wheels, and the cry of a lone hawk circled high overhead. 6 months ago, that same road had been the stage for the moment that bound Nate Callahan and Isabella Vasquez together, though neither of them could have guessed it at the time. Bella had been traveling alone toward Santa Fe, a basket of supplies rattling in the back of her wagon. It was dangerous country for a woman, but she carried herself with the stubbornness of someone born to the frontier. Even so, when 3 drifters stepped out from behind a mesquite stand and blocked her path, her courage faltered. They were rough men, unshaven, stinking of whiskey. The leader grinned as he tugged the reins of her horse to halt the wagon. "Now what's a pretty señorita doing out here all alone?" His hand slid along the wooden seat toward her knee. Bella had tried to push him back, her voice steady even as her heart hammered. "Take your hand off me!" The laughter that followed was ugly, echoing across the empty plain. Another man yanked her down from the wagon, her skirts tearing as she stumbled against the dirt. The third spat tobacco, muttering something about teaching her a lesson. And then 2 shots cracked, quick and sharp. Dust leapt at their boots. The sound split the silence, and the drifters froze. Nate Callahan emerged from the scrub with his Colt still smoking, his stance steady, his gaze colder than steel. "Next step you take," he said, voice low and deadly calm, "and the 3rd bullet won't miss." For a heartbeat, the men considered testing him, but the look in his eyes convinced them otherwise. Cursing, they scrambled back toward the mesquite, their courage scattering with the wind. Bella lay half in the dust, her shoulder exposed where her dress had torn. She looked up at him, at the broad-shouldered cowboy with the gun still drawn, and for the first time saw not just danger, but deliverance. Nate holstered his weapon and crouched beside her. "You hurt?" She nodded faintly, blinking against tears she refused to shed. Her arm was scraped, blood seeping where the fabric had torn. Without a word, he pulled a strip of cloth from his saddlebag, wrapping it around her wound with a care that surprised them both. His hands were calloused, rough with years of gun smoke and hard labor, but his touch was gentle, too gentle for the killer the world believed him to be. "You'll be fine," he said quietly, tying off the bandage. "Best get back in your wagon." She stared at him, memorizing every detail, the line of his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes, the faint scar at his temple. "Who are you?" she whispered.
He hesitated only a moment before lying. Tom Rivers. The name fell from his lips like an afterthought, but to Bella it became a lifeline. She clung to it, even as he helped her to her feet, even as he tipped his hat and walked back into the wilderness, leaving her with nothing but the echo of gunshots and the memory of hands that shouldn't have been so kind. 6 months later, in the storm-lit cabin, that memory still burned between them, fueling every word, every breath. And now Bella stood face to face with the truth. Tom Rivers never existed. Only Nate Callahan remained. The storm rattled the cabin shutters, a restless drumbeat against the silence inside. Nate leaned back against the rough-hewn wall, arms folded, watching Isabella move closer. The fire in her eyes was more dangerous than any pistol aimed at his chest. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, though the words lacked conviction. "If your father finds you in my cabin, it won't matter what I did 6 months ago. He'll see you as ruined and me as good as dead. I don't care what he sees." Her voice was sharp, defiant, the voice of a woman who had lived too long under someone else's judgment. "I've been looking for you, Nate. Every ranch hand I asked, every drifter who passed through Lincoln, no one had seen a man named Tom Rivers, because Tom Rivers doesn't exist." He stiffened at the sound of his real name again. It felt like a verdict, heavy and final. "And when you did figure out who I was, you came anyway?" Yes. She didn't hesitate. She closed the distance between them, the lamplight painting her features in amber and shadow. Rain had dampened her blouse, and the fabric clung to her like a second skin. "I had to see you again, to know that what I felt on that road wasn't some fever dream." Nate's jaw tightened. "What you felt was fear. I happened to be standing in the way of it." "No," she whispered, her hand brushing the edge of the table between them. "What I felt was safe. For the first time in my life, with a gun in your hand, I felt safe." The words cut him deeper than any bullet. Safe. He'd spent years being the man decent folk crossed the street to avoid. Outlaw, gunman, killer. And yet, to her, he had been safety. Her gaze searched his face, unflinching. "I know what you've done. I know about Bob Ollinger. I know you carry blood on your hands. But I also know what kind of man tends a wound with such care. What kind of man walks away instead of taking what he could have that day." Nate backed against the wall, as though distance could shield him from the truth in her words. His heart pounded, not from fear of her father's rope, but from the nearness of her, the scent of desert sage in her damp hair, the trembling in her breath. "Bella!" Her name came out rough, like a warning and a prayer tangled together. "You don't know what you're doing." Her lips curved into a ghost of a smile. "Don't I?" She moved around the table slowly, deliberately, her skirt brushing the floorboards, her presence filling the one-room cabin until Nate felt cornered without a single shot fired. He could feel the heat radiating from her body before she even touched him. "I've thought about you every night since Santa Fe," she said, her voice softer now, threaded with longing. "Wondering if I'd imagined the way you looked at me. Wondering if a man like you could ever look at a woman like me and see more than the sheriff's daughter." Lightning split the sky outside, casting her in a sudden blaze of white light. For a heartbeat, she looked like something otherworldly, an angel or a temptation sent to test him. And Nate Callahan, outlaw, gunman, fugitive, knew he was already failing the test. The wind drove rain against the tin roof, filling the silence between them. Nate turned from her, his hand tightening on the windowsill, eyes fixed on the black horizon, as though he could outrun her gaze. "You want to know who I really am?" His voice was low, ragged, like gravel under a wagon wheel. "Fine. But when I'm finished, you'll wish you'd never stepped foot in this cabin." Bella stood still, her hands clasped in front of her skirt. She didn't flinch. "Tell me." Nate exhaled, the sound closer to a growl. "I rode with John Tunstall. You've heard that name." Her eyes flickered, recognition. Everyone in Lincoln County had heard of the English rancher gunned down in cold blood, the spark that lit the Lincoln County War. "He treated men fair," Nate continued, his tone sharpening with old anger. "Didn't matter if you were Mexican, Apache, or a dirt-poor drifter. If you worked honest, he paid honest. That's why Murphy's men hated him. They wanted it all, the land, the cattle, the law in their pockets, and they killed him for it." Nate's fists clenched at his sides. He could still see it, Tunstall's lifeless body in the dirt, blood soaking the ground, and the regulators swearing vengeance. "I fought beside those men," Nate said. "We called ourselves regulators, but to the world we were just another gang of killers. Some of them relished the bloodshed. I didn't. But when bullets start flying, nobody asks what's in your heart." He turned back to face her, the lamplight carving hard shadows across his face. And then there was Bob Ollinger. Bella's breath caught. She knew the name. Half the territory did. Ollinger, the deputy with a cruel streak, the man who had terrorized half the Mexican community under the guise of law. He was ready to gun down a boy in a cantina, 16 years old. No weapon, no chance. Just a kid with brown skin in the wrong place at the wrong time. Nate's jaw tightened until it ached. I called him out, gave him a fair draw. He went for his gun and lost. That was the truth of it. Bella's gaze softened. "That's not murder. That's justice." "Not to your father." Nate's laugh was hollow. "To him, Ollinger was a deputy. I was an outlaw who dared challenge the badge. Doesn't matter what the truth is. When the sheriff tells the story, people listen. And the story says Nate Callahan is a murderer." The weight of the word hung in the air between them. Murderer. Bella shook her head slowly, her dark hair brushing her shoulders. "No, I don't believe it. You didn't have to fire warning shots that day on the road. You didn't have to bind my wounds. A murderer doesn't do those things." Nate stepped closer, close enough that he could see the defiance in her eyes, the stubborn fire that made her more dangerous than any gunman. "You don't understand, Bella. Every man I've killed lives in my chest like a ghost. Every lawman with a grudge carries my name on his lips. I'm not some knight on a white horse. I'm the bad man your father warns you about." Her voice was steady when she answered. "Then why do I feel safer standing here with you than anywhere else in the world?" The question struck him harder than any bullet ever had. The lamp flickered as the storm swelled, wind howling like a pack of wolves clawing at the walls. Nate paced the narrow cabin floor, the boards creaking beneath his boots. Every nerve in his body screamed for distance, yet he couldn't take his eyes off her. Bella stood near the table, her fingers brushing the wood as though steadying herself. Her blouse clung damp against her skin, the high collar loosened just enough to reveal the delicate hollow of her throat. She had come into this cabin a sheriff's daughter. She now carried herself like a woman who had decided what she wanted and would not be denied. "You don't understand what you're asking," Nate said, his voice rough. "Every man I've ever cared for, Tunstall, the regulators, ended in the dirt. You stand too close to me, you'll share their fate." Bella's lips curved, soft but daring. "Maybe I don't mind the risk." His heart lurched. "Don't say that." Lightning slashed across the sky, filling the room with stark white light. For an instant, she looked like a vision torn between heaven and earth, an angel bathed in storm fire. She took a step forward, deliberate, the wooden floor groaning beneath her boots. "You think I came here by accident?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I rode through the storm because I couldn't spend another night pretending. I'm not a child, Nate. I'm not naive about the world. I know what it is to be stared at, touched without asking. And I know what it means when a man chooses not to take advantage, when he chooses honor instead of desire. He swallowed hard, memories flooding back. Her torn dress, her trembling breath, the way his hands had bound her wound as if she were made of glass. He had walked away then, but the memory had followed him like a shadow ever since. "You want a fantasy," he said, his voice breaking. "You want to believe in the man who appeared on that road like some savior. But that's not who I am. I am the outlaw people spit after, the one your father hunts." Bella closed the last of the distance, her body a whisper from his. The air between them charged like the storm outside, alive with thunder they both felt in their bones. She tilted her face up to him, her breath warm against his jaw. "Then why," she whispered, "do you make me feel safer than I've ever felt in my life?" The words undid him. His resolve cracked, and before he realized it, his hand was cupping her face, rough thumb brushing her cheek. She leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed, as though she had waited 6 months for this one moment. Nate's breath came ragged, torn between honor and hunger. "This is madness," he murmured, even as his other arm found its way around her waist, drawing her closer. "Then let me be mad," she breathed, her lips grazing the edge of his. Thunder crashed, rattling the cabin, but neither of them flinched. The storm had moved inside now, alive in their blood, their hearts, their trembling hands. Nate tasted the heat of her nearness, knew one more breath would close the distance forever. And still, at the very edge of surrender, he forced himself to pull back. "No," he said hoarsely, chest heaving. "If I take you tonight, Bella, I'll lose the last shred of honor I have left." Her eyes opened, glistening with both frustration and something fiercer. "And if you don't," she asked, voice breaking, "will that honor keep you warm when the rope is around your neck?" Dawn crept in through the cracks of the cabin walls, pale gold spilling across the rough boards. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the heavy silence between them. Nate sat on the edge of the bed, boots on, Colt strapped at his side, while Bella pulled her cloak tight around her shoulders. Neither spoke the words that hovered in the air, what had almost happened, what still burned between them. The first sound came from outside, hooves pounding against wet earth. Not one rider, many. Nate was on his feet instantly, gun drawn, eyes narrowing through the narrow window slit. 4 riders thundered down the trail, led by a silver-haired figure in a black hat. Sheriff Miguel Vasquez. Bella's breath hitched. "Papa!" Nate's gut clenched. "Back window, now, you've got to go." But Bella was already shaking her head, her fingers fumbling with the buttons of her cloak. "If you run, he'll never stop. He'll hunt you from here to California, and if you fight, you'll die before sundown." His jaw tightened. "Better me than you." She caught his face between her hands, forcing his eyes to hers. "Trust me, just this once, please, Nate." Before he could answer, the heavy knock of a rifle butt struck the cabin door. Sheriff Vasquez's voice carried like a whip through the morning air. "Come out, Callahan. We both know you're in there." Bella moved before Nate could stop her, throwing open the door and stepping onto the porch. The riders reined in, their horses snorting clouds of steam into the crisp dawn. "Isabella Maria Vasquez." The sheriff's voice could have frozen fire. "What are you doing here?" "Papa, I can explain." "Can you explain," he cut her off, "why my daughter spent the night in the cabin of a wanted murderer?" His hand dropped to the butt of his revolver, rage trembling in his frame. "He's not a murderer," Bella said, her voice steady though her hands shook. "Bob Ollinger was going to kill that boy, and you know it. Everyone in town knew what kind of man Ollinger was." "He's my deputy." He was a monster who hid behind a badge. The silence that followed stretched taut as a noose. Deputies shifted in their saddles, avoiding their sheriff's gaze. Even they knew the truth of Ollinger's cruelty. The door creaked, and Nate stepped onto the porch, hands raised but ready. Bella immediately moved in front of him, her back against his chest, chin lifted in defiance. Sheriff Vasquez's eyes narrowed, his fury burning cold. "You touched my daughter." Bella flushed crimson, but did not look away. "He's been nothing but a gentleman, even when I wanted more." Nate felt her trembling against him, the courage it took for her to bear herself in front of her father and his men. He slid an arm around her waist, steadying her. "She's telling the truth," Nate said, voice low but steady. "Nothing happened that would dishonor her, nothing she didn't want." The sheriff's jaw clenched, pain shadowing his features. "You think that matters? You think I care about her honor when she could have been killed? When she threw away her reputation, her future, for a man who will be swinging from a rope before the week is out?" Bella turned in Nate's arms, her eyes blazing with tears and fire. "Then don't let them hang him. Let me save him the way he saved me." For the first time, the sheriff faltered. The porch boards groaned beneath the weight of silence. 4 horses pawed at the ground, their riders holding their breath as Sheriff Miguel Vasquez squared his shoulders. His hand hovered near his revolver, his gaze locked on Nate like a hangman eyeing his rope. "Step away from my daughter," the sheriff growled. "No!" Bella's voice cracked like a whip. She pressed herself tighter against Nate's chest, her chin high. "If you want to shoot him, you'll have to shoot through me first." "Isabella!" "I mean it, Papa." Her words trembled, but her stance did not. "You've always taught me to stand for what's right. Well, this is right. Nate isn't the monster you think he is." The sheriff's face darkened, his anger cold and measured. "He's a wanted man. He carries blood on his hands." Bella's eyes blazed. "And yet he could have taken advantage of me the night he saved me. He didn't. He could have run from Ollinger. He didn't. He gave that man a fair draw, more than Ollinger ever gave anyone. That's not a killer. That's a man worth saving." One of the deputies gave a nervous chuckle. "Sheriff, she wants us to pin a badge on an outlaw." Bella spun toward him, fire in her gaze. "I want you to pin a badge on the man who saved your sheriff's daughter, on the man who chose honor when no one was watching." The laughter died quick. Even hardened men found it hard to mock her conviction. Sheriff Vasquez dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the wet ground with a heavy thud. He looked from his daughter to Nate, and his eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. "Why would you want that, Callahan?" His voice was low, controlled, but beneath it burned something rawer than anger, pain. "Why wear a badge when you could just ride away? You've been running your whole life. Why stop now?" Nate met his stare without flinching. "Because I'm tired of running," he said. "Because your daughter deserves better than a man who's always looking over his shoulder." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You think you deserve her?" "No, sir." Nate's voice carried the weight of every mile, every sin he'd tried to outrun. "But I think I could try to become a man who does." The words settled over the porch like dust after a gunfight. Deputies exchanged uncertain glances. Bella clutched Nate's hand tighter, as though willing her father to see what she saw. At last, the sheriff exhaled, the fight draining from his shoulders. "There's a gang of rustlers working the northern range. They've been stealing cattle for months. Men tried to take them down and failed." He stepped closer, boots squelching in the mud. "You want a chance at redemption, Callahan? Ride with me. Help me bring them in. Prove you can follow orders, not just give them. Do that, and maybe we'll talk about a badge." "And if I refuse?" Nate asked. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, sharp as a drawn blade. "Then you'll be in irons by sundown and swinging from a rope before the week's out." The air hung heavy with the choice. Deputy or dead man? Nate's hand tightened on Bella's. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man with nothing left to lose. He had something now, someone, and that made the choice for him. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The morning sun bled red over the horizon as Sheriff Vasquez's posse gathered in the dusty yard behind the jailhouse. Horses stamped restlessly, leather creaked, rifles glinted in the light. It was the kind of dawn Nate Callahan had known too many times before. Men setting out to hunt other men. Only this time, he wasn't the hunted. At least, not yet. Deputy Thomas Rivera eyed him like a rattler coiled to strike. "Sheriff," he muttered, not bothering to lower his voice, "we ride with outlaws now?" "Not outlaws," Vasquez said curtly. "Deputies. For today." The word sat heavy, sharp as a spur digging into Nate's ribs. A deputy. He felt the weight of the borrowed badge Vasquez had pressed into his palm, not yet pinned to his chest. He hadn't decided if he had the right to wear it. Rivera spat in the dirt. A badge won't scrub blood from his hands. Nate kept his gaze steady, though every instinct begged him to fire back. Not with bullets, though that would have been easier, but with the truth. Instead, he bit it down, remembering Bella's plea, prove him wrong. And then she was there, walking quickly across the yard, her dark braids swinging, the hem of her blue riding skirt dusted from the street. Bella stopped in front of him, her eyes searching his face as if memorizing it. "You'll need this," she whispered. From beneath her blouse, she drew a small silver cross on a chain, its surface dulled by years of wear. "It was my mother's. She wore it every day until the fever took her. She believed it kept her safe." Nate's throat tightened. "Bella!" "Don't argue." She pressed it into his hand, curling his fingers around it. "If you won't wear the badge, at least wear this." For a moment, the yard, the horses, the hard stares, they all faded. It was just the two of them, her hand warm against his, her eyes carrying the weight of faith he didn't know how to hold. He slipped the chain over his head, the cross cold against his chest, and felt something shift deep inside him. Rivera snorted. "Cross won't save him when the bullets start flying." Nate finally met his eyes. "Maybe not," he said evenly, "but I'll be damned if I let you fall to one." Rivera stiffened, surprised by the steel in his voice. The sheriff mounted his horse, breaking the moment. "Mount up, we ride north. Rustlers have been seen along the Pecos Trail." His gaze lingered on Nate, hard as granite. "This is your chance, Callahan. Don't waste it." Nate swung into the saddle, the silver cross glinting faintly in the morning sun. The posse wheeled as one and thundered out of Lincoln, dust rising behind them like smoke. For the first time in years, Nate wasn't running from the law, he was riding with it. And whether it ended in redemption or a noose, there was no turning back. The posse rode hard along the Pecos Trail, hooves pounding against the cracked earth, dust curling up into the desert air. The sun climbed high, burning down on leather hats and sweat-streaked brows. A hawk wheeled overhead, silent witness to men chasing other men. Nate kept his horse steady, his eyes scanning the land. He had learned long ago to read the signs others missed, the faint drag of hooves cutting across dry ground, the broken mesquite branch where a rider had brushed past. He leaned low in the saddle, tracing the story written in dirt and stone. "They're 3 days ahead at most," he called, his voice carrying over the wind. "Running a herd this size leaves tracks too big to hide." Rivera scowled. "Or maybe you're just leading us into an ambush." "Enough," Sheriff Vasquez rode up beside them, his gaze fixed on Nate.
"You've got skill, Callahan, no one doubts that. But skill without discipline is just chaos waiting to burn the county." Nate's jaw tightened. Sometimes chaos is the only thing that keeps men alive. Ask the boy Ollinger tried to kill. He'd be buried 6 feet deep if I hadn't broken the law that day. The sheriff's hand twitched at the reins. The law is the line between order and bloodshed.
Without it, we're no better than the rustlers we're hunting. And what happens when the law hides behind cowards? Nate shot back. What happens when the badge protects killers and leaves innocents to die? The horses slowed as tension thickened between the two men. The deputies exchanged wary glances, unsure whether they were riding toward rustlers or watching a different war spark right in front of them. Vasquez's voice dropped, hard as stone. "I swore an oath to uphold this law, no matter the cost. That's the burden I carry. And if you think your brand of outlaw justice is worth more than the word of the law, then maybe I should have put a rope around your neck instead of a badge on your chest." Nate's hand brushed against the silver cross beneath his shirt, the metal cold against his skin. He thought of Bella, of the faith she had pressed into his hands. "I don't want to be an outlaw anymore," he said, quieter now but firm. "But don't ask me to stand by while men like Ollinger or these rustlers use power to crush the weak. If the law won't stop them, I will." The sheriff's dark eyes held his for a long moment, filled with conflict. Finally, he spurred his horse forward, ending the argument but not the tension. The posse followed, the trail winding into the mountains, shadows deepening beneath red cliffs. Nate rode with them, his jaw set, knowing the real fight ahead wasn't just against rustlers. It was against the man beside him, the law itself. By dusk, the posse had tracked the stolen herd into a narrow canyon where shadows clung like smoke. The rustlers thought they were clever, driving cattle through the choke point. But their trail was too fresh, too obvious. Nate's instincts prickled. This was no hiding place. It was a trap. He pulled his horse short. "Hold," he warned, "they're waiting in there." Rivera sneered. "Or maybe you're trying to spook us so you can ride off in the dark." "Quiet," Vasquez snapped, but the words came too late. A rifle cracked from the ridge. A bullet screamed past Rivera's hat and punched splinters into a mesquite post. "Ambush!" The canyon erupted. Rustlers spilled from the rocks above, gunfire echoing off the walls. Horses reared, deputies scrambled for cover, and the cattle bawled in panic as dust and gun smoke filled the air.
Nate dove from his saddle, rolling behind a boulder. His Colt roared twice, driving the attackers back from their vantage. "They've got high ground," he shouted. "We need to push 'em off the ridge or we're fish in a barrel." Rivera fired blindly, crouched low behind his horse. He was green at this kind of fight, too quick on the trigger, too slow on his feet. Nate saw the danger before Rivera did. One rustler flanking around a ledge, rifle leveled right at the deputy's exposed side. Nate didn't think. He moved. He sprinted out from cover, slamming Rivera to the ground just as the shot cracked. The bullet chewed stone where Rivera's ribs had been a heartbeat earlier. Rivera stared up at him wide-eyed. "Save your breath," Nate growled, dragging him behind the boulder as more rounds whined overhead. He leaned out, sighted, and squeezed. The rustler on the ledge dropped his rifle and tumbled down the rocks, hitting the dirt with a sickening thud. Rivera panted, shaken. For the first time, there was something in his eyes other than contempt. The sheriff's voice rang above the chaos. "Drive 'em back! Push the ridge!" Nate surged forward, leading the climb.
His revolver barked, his boots scrambling on loose stone. Deputies followed, emboldened. The fight turned, the rustlers retreating under the sudden charge. Within minutes, the canyon was silent again, save for the ringing of ears and the restless shuffle of cattle. Breathless, Nate reloaded, his hands steady despite the smoke stinging his eyes. Rivera staggered up beside him, still catching his breath. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally muttered, "You saved my life." Nate slid the revolver back into its holster. "Don't mention it." But he saw the shift. Rivera's suspicion cracked, replaced by something harder to shake off: respect. That night, the posse made camp along a dry creek bed. The cattle had been recovered, but the rustlers weren't beaten yet. They had scattered into the hills, wounded and desperate, the kind of men most dangerous when cornered. A fire crackled in the circle of riders, throwing long shadows on the canyon walls. Nate sat apart, cleaning his Colt with slow, steady movements. Rivera sat across the flames, eyes flicking toward him with something new. Not trust, not yet, but no longer the naked suspicion he'd carried before. Progress, Nate supposed, though the silence between them weighed heavy. Sheriff Vasquez rose from his bedroll, stepping a few paces from camp. He removed his hat and knelt in the dust. His lips moved in a prayer too soft for the men to hear, but Nate caught fragments carried by the night wind. "Señor, guíame. Keep her safe. Forgive my failures." It struck Nate harder than any bullet. The lawman he had hated in silence for months, the man who wanted him dead, was here, praying like any other father, a man torn between justice and love for his daughter. Nate's hand brushed the silver cross beneath his shirt. The cold metal seemed to burn against his skin, a reminder of Bella's faith, her trust in him. He wondered if Sheriff Vasquez prayed for her soul every night, the same way his own mother once had for his. A rider approached camp just before midnight, his horse lathered with sweat. He carried a small folded note, pressed into his hand by a dark-haired girl in Lincoln before he rode out. "Said it was for Callahan," the rider muttered before bedding down. Nate unfolded the paper slowly.
The handwriting was neat, careful, as though each stroke of ink carried more weight than words could bear. "Nate, if you're reading this, it means you rode with my father. I don't know what you'll face out there, but I need you to know, whatever choice you make, you don't ride alone. You carry me with you. You carry my faith. Come back to me, Bella." The words blurred as Nate stared at them, his throat tight, his chest aching in a way gunfights never touched. For years, he had ridden alone, convinced he deserved nothing else. Yet here was proof, ink on paper, that someone believed in him enough to stake her heart on it. He folded the letter carefully and slid it inside his coat, near the silver cross. For the first time in years, he let himself whisper a prayer, unsure who he was speaking to. "Don't let me fall, not this time." Above them, the stars burned cold and bright. Tomorrow would bring blood, he knew. But tonight, in the silence of the canyon, Nate Callahan felt the stirrings of something he thought he had lost forever: hope. Dawn broke pale over the canyon rim. The posse rode silent, rifles ready, eyes scanning the ridges where the rustlers had fled. Tracks led to a box canyon, hemmed in by stone walls, no way out but the way they had come. Sheriff Vasquez raised a hand, signaling the men to dismount. "They're in there," he said. "Stay sharp." Gunfire answered him before his boots hit the ground. Bullets ricocheted off stone, spitting dust and sparks. The posse scrambled for cover, returning fire, but the rustlers were dug in tight. Nate crawled behind a boulder, loading fresh rounds into his Colt. He'd been in traps like this before. Men didn't fight this hard unless they had someone worth following. Sure enough, when the smoke cleared for a heartbeat, Nate saw him. A broad-shouldered man with a scar running down his jaw, rifle steady, eyes cold with recognition. "Callahan!" the rustler leader bellowed over the din. "Didn't expect to see you wearing the sheriff's colors. Thought you were smarter than that." The words cut sharper than bullets. Nate rose just enough to meet his stare. "Not anymore." The man laughed, bitter and loud. "Come on, Nate. You and me, we're the same. The law don't care about men like us. You think Vasquez will keep you around once you've done his dirty work? You'll hang just the same as me." Nate's grip tightened on the Colt. The rustler's words echoed like old ghosts. Every outlaw he'd ever ridden with, every night he'd lain awake wondering if redemption was just another lie. "Drop that badge," the man shouted. "Come stand with your own. Ride with me, and we'll bleed this county dry." Nate's breath came slow, steady. He felt the weight of Bella's cross against his chest, the folded letter close to his heart. Her words whispered back, "You don't ride alone. You carry me with you." He looked across the canyon at the sheriff, crouched behind a rock, shouting orders, his voice raw but unyielding. And for the first time, Nate didn't just see a lawman hunting him. He saw a father fighting to keep his world from breaking. The choice stood before him like the muzzle of a gun. Outlaw or lawman, past or future, death or redemption. Nate rose from cover, Colt steady in his hand. The rustler leader grinned, thinking he had won. But Nate didn't aim for the kill. His shot rang out sharp and clean, slamming into the man's shoulder and spinning him to the ground. Alive, defeated. The posse surged forward, wresting rifles from stunned rustlers, binding their hands with rawhide. The canyon filled with the echoes of surrender. Nate lowered his weapon, his chest heaving. He had done the unthinkable, spared an enemy, chosen law over vengeance. For the first time in years, he felt lighter, as though some chain inside him had finally broken. The rustlers rode bound and beaten behind the posse, tied to their saddles, heads bowed in defeat. The sun sank low over the desert as Lincoln's rooftops came into view, their outlines bathed in gold and crimson. Dust rose from the returning horses, carrying with it the smell of sweat, leather, and victory. Nate rode near the front, the silver cross heavy on his chest. For once, the weight felt less like a burden and more like a promise. Every hoofbeat hammered the truth deeper into him. He had chosen the law. He had chosen to live, not merely survive. The townsfolk gathered in the street as the posse entered, whispers rippling like wind through tall grass. "That's Callahan. Rode with the sheriff? Brought them in alive?" The badge Vasquez had lent him gleamed faintly in the fading light, and for the first time the whispers did not sting. They wondered. They hoped. Sheriff Vasquez dismounted first, his boots striking the dirt with finality. He turned to Nate, eyes unreadable, dark as storm clouds. "Untie them. Get them into the cells." His deputies obeyed, driving the rustlers toward the jailhouse. When the dust settled, only Nate and the sheriff stood in the street. Rivera lingered a few paces off, watching, but he did not interfere. "You had the chance to kill him," Vasquez said at last, his voice low but carrying. "The leader. You could have ended it right there. Why didn't you?" Nate slid from the saddle, landing squarely on his feet. His hand brushed the cross beneath his shirt. "Because if I'd killed him, I'd still be the same man you wanted to hang. Outlaw, executioner. That's not who I want to be anymore." For a long moment, silence pressed between them. The crowd leaned in, waiting for the verdict, the judgment only the sheriff could give. Then Vasquez stepped closer, his weathered face etched with something Nate had never seen there before, something close to respect. "You did good work out there, saved Rivera's life, brought the rustlers in breathing. That's more than some men with a badge have managed." Nate's chest tightened. So what happens now? The sheriff studied him, weighing the man before him against the outlaw he had chased for so long. Finally, he reached into his coat and pulled out the star-shaped badge he had offered once before. He held it out in the fading light. "You want to prove you've changed? Then wear it. Not borrowed, not for one ride, for real." Nate stared at the badge, the metal gleaming like a cross forged in fire. He thought of Bella's letter, of her faith. He thought of the men he had spared, and the man he still could become. Slowly, with steady hands, he pinned it to his chest. The sheriff nodded once. Deputy Callahan. And just like that, the outlaw was gone. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. The streets of Lincoln glowed soft beneath the last light of day. Townsfolk lingered in clusters, whispering, their eyes flicking toward Nate Callahan as though seeing him for the first time. Not the outlaw whose name had haunted wanted posters, but the man who had ridden back beside the sheriff, rustlers bound in tow. Bella was waiting. She stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, a blue dress falling around her like the desert twilight, her hair loosed from its braid. When Nate dismounted, she was already moving, skirts brushing the steps, her eyes fixed on him, as though afraid he might vanish if she blinked. "You came back," she breathed, stopping only a foot away. Her hand hovered at his chest, not quite touching, as though she needed permission. Nate caught her wrist gently and pressed her palm against the badge pinned over his heart. "I told you I would." Her eyes widened at the gleam of the star. "He gave it to you? For real?" "For real." His voice was steady, but inside something trembled. He hadn't worn chains, but he had carried them all the same. Tonight, for the first time, he felt them fall away. Bella's smile broke like sunlight after storm. "I knew you could do it."
"I knew you weren't the man they said you were." Nate shook his head. "I was. Maybe I still am. But I'm trying to be more than that because of you." She stepped into his arms then, closing the distance, her cheek pressed against his chest. He held her, breathing her in, the scent of desert sage and something softer, something that smelled like home. For a long moment, the noise of the town fell away. There was only her heartbeat beneath his hand, steady and real, reminding him that redemption wasn't just a word, it was something to live for. The door creaked, and Sheriff Vasquez stepped out onto the porch. His eyes lingered on the two of them, expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he said simply, "Your young man looks like he could use a meal." Bella pulled back just enough to smile at her father, still holding Nate's hand as though daring the world to break it apart. "Yes, Papa." The sheriff gave a small nod and turned back inside, leaving them in the soft glow of the lamplight. Nate let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding.
"Your father may not have shot me, but I think supper with him might be worse." Bella laughed, the sound bright and unguarded, like bells carrying across the desert night. "He'll come around. He has to, because I'm not letting you go." Nate brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering at her cheek. "I used to think I didn't deserve this, that I didn't deserve you." "You don't," she smiled, eyes glinting with both mischief and truth. "But neither do I deserve you. That's the beauty of it, Nate. Grace doesn't ask if we deserve it, it just comes." He kissed her then, slow, certain, with the gentleness of a man who had spent too long believing his hands could only bring harm. Her lips met his with equal certainty, and for a moment the world outside them ceased to matter. When they finally pulled apart, Bella rested her forehead against his. "Welcome home, Deputy Callahan." Home. The word sank into him like water into parched earth. He had ridden across deserts, through wars, into darkness. And somehow, impossibly, he had arrived here, with her. 3 months later, Lincoln County looked different to Nate Callahan. Maybe it was the same dusty street, the same adobe buildings with their cracked walls, the same church bell ringing across the square. But to him, everything had changed. The badge pinned to his chest caught the afternoon sun as he rode into town with the last of the rustlers in tow. Their hands were bound, their horses tied together in a line, the fight drained from them. Behind Nate, 2 deputies, men who once wouldn't ride within 10 paces of him, followed without question. Children darted from doorways to point at the prisoners, their voices carrying across the street. "Deputy Callahan brought him in," they shouted. Not outlaw, not murderer, deputy. And on the porch of the sheriff's office, Bella waited. She wore a simple dress of sky blue cotton, her hair tumbling loose around her shoulders. When Nate dismounted, she was already there, stepping down to meet him, her smile wide and certain. "Any trouble?" she asked, her hand sliding into his as naturally as breath. "Nothing I couldn't handle," Nate said, pressing a kiss to her hair. The scent of desert sage clung to her, grounding him more than any star pinned to his chest.
The sheriff stood in the doorway, arms folded across his chest, watching. His eyes were sharp as ever, but there was something different now, a quiet respect that softened the hard edges of his stare. "The rustlers?" he asked. "On their way to the territorial prison by tomorrow morning," Nate replied. Vasquez nodded slowly. Then, to Nate's surprise, he smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real. "Good work, deputy." The word deputy carried no mockery this time, only recognition. Bella squeezed Nate's hand, her eyes shining with pride. That evening, they shared supper at the Vasquez home. The table was simple: beans, fresh bread, roasted venison, but to Nate it felt like a feast. He hadn't eaten at a family table since before the war, before the running, before he became a name whispered in saloons and on wanted posters. The sheriff bowed his head, giving thanks, his voice steady. Nate found himself bowing too, his hand brushing the silver cross at his chest. He wasn't sure if the prayer was his yet, but the act of bowing, the act of listening, felt like a beginning. As the meal wore on, conversation softened. Bella laughed, her hand brushing Nate's beneath the table. Even the sheriff let slip a story or two of his own reckless youth, and the sound of his deep chuckle filled the small house. Later, when the dishes were cleared and the fire burned low, Nate stepped outside into the cool desert night. Bella followed, slipping her arm through his, resting her head against his shoulder. The stars blazed bright overhead, unchanging, eternal. "6 months ago," Nate said quietly, "I was a man with no future, no home, no reason to believe in tomorrow." "And now?" Bella asked. He looked down at her, at the woman who had risked everything to see more in him than he saw in himself. "Now I have everything. A town that's starting to trust me, a badge that means something, and you." She smiled, lifting her face to his. "Grace brought you here, Nate. Don't ever forget that." He kissed her then, slow and certain, with all the gratitude of a man given a second chance. And as the desert wind carried the sound of the church bell across Lincoln, Nate Callahan finally knew peace. Sometimes the hardest journey isn't across the desert or through a gunfight. Sometimes it's the road a broken heart must walk to find its way back home. If this story stirred something in your soul, don't stop here. Subscribe and join us for our Western Love Stories series, where every tale is a journey through dust, danger, and devotion. These are not just stories of cowboys and outlaws, but of hearts that ache, heal, and find hope beneath the wide, untamed skies. Each chapter is a lantern in the dark, carrying the glow of compassion, sacrifice, and second chances. Like the whisper of a church bell at dusk or the soft touch of rain on desert soil, these stories remind us that even in the harshest places, love can take root and flourish. Ride with us through moments of longing, courage, and redemption. Let these voices from the past echo into your own heart, because some fires never fade and some loves are timeless. Subscribe now and be part of the journey.